Imagine a galaxy filled with beasts so fearsome that no creature dares to approach them, except humans. In a universe where survival is a daily struggle, what is it about these fragile beings from Earth that allows them to tame the most dangerous creatures? Are they fearless, or is there something deeper driving them? Join us as we uncover the shocking truth behind why only humans can tame the galaxy's most terrifying beasts. "Watch there be nothing here," Wendry muttered, holding a long-ago smuggled human rifle to his chest. "We must have traveled over 9 to get to this rotten hulk of a planet, and we haven't even seen anything." Jeremy, a human, rolled his head over to the black Yorpal, pressing his lips together in annoyance. Hunting doesn't always end quickly. Sometimes you just have to hike around a planet for a bit until you find what you're looking for. Can we find what we're looking for? A little faster, Granjon sighed out, holding both a rifle in her upper arms and a pistol in one of her lower arms. "This is taking forever. We keep having to stop and make camp. You said it would only take a day at the most." Jeremy grumbled in his throat before speaking yes, and it appears I was wrong. "Now, if you two keep belly-etching the entire time, we're never going to find this thing. We shouldn't even be on a job like this," Wendry said, wheedling his AK-49. "We're smugglers. We're supposed to be running around with crates of these things." Grangon chuffed out a laugh. "We took this job because it pays our usual rate 10 times over if we catch this thing for a..." She scratched her chest, her voice humming hollowly inside her mask. "Remind me again, who is paying us to do this Magamon trick door?" Jeremy replied, "He's a massive collector and wants this thing for his daughter or something." "What is a fella more going to do with an animal of this size?" Wendry asked, remembering the towering, lumbering peoples that looked like sentient granite. They're not exactly an energetic people, and they aren't what I would call athletic either. Jeremy shrugged. "Stick it in a cage with a label. This big rock just has animals on it anyway, so it's not like anyone is going to miss it. It's a nice rock, though," Granjon said, smiling under her mask. "Very pretty, lots of plants. Not too hot, not too cold. It's a surprise that an intelligent life form hasn't evolved here at all, as it could not be in a more perfect habitable zone." Jeremy grunted as he started up the incline of a rocky hill, batting a large leaf from a tree away from his face. "Say what you will, I did not enjoy that part of the forest with those weird-looking mushrooms. Entire place felt like it was watching me the entire time." "Yes, well, you'll get some weird areas too," Granjon said, starting up the hill behind Jeremy. Granjon looked at their backs, then down to her aching, padded paws. "I should have bought those modified boots while we were on Earth. Feels like I've been walking on glass since the 3rd day of US landing here. Stop being a little wiener and come on," Jeremy chided, smacking another leaf away from his face. This place was a forest planet, through and through, just hundreds of miles of forests, ponds, lakes and oceans that seemed to vibrate with wildlife. The humans were looking to make it a settlement, as it shared a common gravity with most of the Cinderal Confederation, and it would be a neutral planet where everyone could live in peace. Getting past the security blockage and defeating the atmosphere scanners had been the easy part. As far as Jeremy and his crew were concerned, the Emerald Vagabond was a custom ship that had more hardware than a stealth bomber. But instead of packing bombs, it carried crates of contraband. Jeremy had thought the job would have been super simple. Go to the planet, snatch up whatever the hell this animal was, then leave. He pulled out the sketch again and held it up, tilting his head at it as he and his fellow smugglers height. The creature looked a lot like a dragon. If a dragon was mixed with a Maine Coon cat and a timber wolf, according to Magamon, it was going to be small, but everything was small to those rich walking boulders. Jeremy's communication slate chirped, so he stuffed the sketch back into his pocket, instead holding up the slate as he unclipped it from his armored chest plate. Jeremy smiled at it, making Wendry look over. "Told you her sister was into you," Wendry said with a grin, looking over at Granjon. "Couldn't even keep 2 of her hands off of you while Granjon was trying to argue with her mother." Granjon stiffened, turning to stare daggers at Wendry from under her mask. "I can't believe you would even say that it's customary for a djinn to hold onto a guest's arm while showing them around our domiciles." Jeremy rolled his eyes, slowing his step to lag behind the 2 bickering aliens. Teeson explained the lipstick mark on Jeremy's cheek, and the fact I saw her holding on to a lot more than his arm. Wendry teased, making sure both his ears and tail were not within reach of the djinn. If you're not careful, you're going to have a some raw problem on your handsy onesies. You little Grangan growled, stop. Towards Wendry and making the Yorpal skitter away, cackling as he took cover within a bush. This is abuse, you know. It's against the Unified Cinderal Confederation Code of Conduct. I'll report you. Wendry laughed out from within his safety bush, doing his best to avoid the free hand of Grenjan that was coming after him. Grenjan finally got a near and started tugging the now hissing and cursing Yorpal out of the bush. Oh, you will you? I'd flip on you so hard, it would make your fur turn more grey. My fur isn't turning grey. Wendry spat, swatting at Grenjan's strong hand. It was just how the light was hitting it. Aha, sure. Grenjan chided, letting go of Wendry's ear and letting the fussing Yorpal recover Jeremy. Why don't you stop her? You know how sensitive my ears are, Wendry said, his voice trailing off as he looked around behind him. He looked left and right, giving the air a light sniff as Jeremy was nowhere to be found. Ah, Grenjan. Grenjan turned around, brushing leaves from her own armored chest plate, but then her eyes narrowed from under her mask. Where's Jeremy? As if on cue, a loud, panicked scream finally made it to their ears, causing Grenjan to startle backwards and Wendry to fluff up with adrenaline. Something grabbed him. Grangan cried out quickly, rustling around with her free hand in a pocket, searching for her tracker. You have the sensitive ears and nose. Why didn't you hear her? Smell anything? Wendry sputtered, his tail and fur fully fluffed out. Smell something. There's nothing here, just us and Jeremy, obviously not. Grenjan growled, turning on her tracker and looking down at the screen as it beeped. Gunjal too. He's moving fast. Come on. Wendry moaned in his throat as he clicked the safety lever down on his AK-49, pulling the buttstock into his shoulder. Oh man, we're so getting eaten, shut up. Grangan hissed, then took off at a run in the direction of Jeremy's tracker. Wendry was right behind her, hoping that whatever took Jeremy would see her first instead of him. Jeremy's tracker blip was moving at incredible speeds and outpaced them several times, only catching up to the blip if Grenjan and Wendry sprinted full out. By the time they caught the blip for the fourth time, they were both wheezing and drenched in sweat. Grennan's hands shook as she held up the tracker screen, sweating pouring down her neck and shoulders in streams, while Wendry wheezed and cursed breathily, holding his hand to a stitch in his side. It took a few minutes for Grenjan and Wendry to get their breath back, the two pacing in place or resting their hands on their knees, dragging in the cool, fresh air around them when they have finally regained the ability to talk. Wendry pointed down at the tracker screen. How far away is he now? Is it still moving? No. Grenjan said, standing up straight. No, it's sitting still just over those sets of hills there. Wendry looked at the tree-covered hills and made an open-mouthed growl, baring his fangs. More hills and trees. Why is this entire planet just hills and trees? Come on, Grenjan said, holding her pistol up and her rifle at the low ready. Wendry set his own rifle back into his shoulder, muttering the entire time they walked. It took a while to make their way through the thickly treed hills, but they finally came up over the last crest, finding themselves in a kind of rock and timber nest. Grangan and Wendry held their rifles up, breathing slowly in and out of their noses as they swept their barrels from side to side, keeping an eye out for any sign of Jeremy. A tail lashed out from the lush grass and swept Grenjan's legs, the djinn letting out a short bark of pain before she fell bodily to the ground. The air being knocked out from her lungs, she wheezed tinnily from inside her mask, and she looked around, seeing Wendry had skittered up a tree like a startled cat, where Grangan coughed out. Looking around and brushing a leaf away from her mask with a shaking hand, Wendry leaned down from the tree trunk he was cleaning to hissing down at her. That was a tail, a big fuck-off, huge tail. Tail. Grangan moaned, leaning up slowly and trying to get her lungs fully inflated again. As she blinked painfully from under her mask, she leaned all the way forward with a grunt, raising her head to look around her. She found herself staring into the wide eyes of Jeremy, just 20 feet away, the human hugged to the chest of a gigantic creature that looked like the thing in the sketch. It was massive, and did indeed look like a dragon of earth, maybe one of the Japanese or Chinese ones. That similarity stopped behind body shape, as the thing had the head of an earth timber wolf and the fur of an extremely fuzzy feline. The fur ran all along the top of the body, while the bottom part was scaled with thick plates of armor. Jeremy Grangdon hissed out, drawing the rifle back up to her shoulder. "You alive?" Jeremy nodded up and down rapidly. His arms held to his chest to keep the creature's long claws from getting to his face. "He's alive," Wendry whispered in shock as he thumped down to the ground gracefully, following the motion all the way to the ground so he lay flat. "How is he alive? It should have eaten him by now. It's high." Jeremy hissed out, closing his eyes tightly as a creature gave a low rumble, shifted and placed its nose against Jeremy's head. Breathing in deeply, Grangan had to slam herself backwards against the ground to avoid the curling tail whipping around, and she sat back up quickly. "You drugged it." "No, it's just high," Jeremy said quietly, trying to wiggle free and only getting pulled close towards the creature's nose. "It was going to eat me, but then started sniffing me." He kept sniffing and fell asleep. The creature happily growled deep in its throat as it rolled over onto its back, wiggling back and forth on the ground, while huffing at Jeremy eagerly, its tail still lashing back and forth like a tree trunk-sized whip. Wendry caught the tail full in his chest and went screeching across the ground towards Jeremy, thumping into the creature's soft chest fur, with a woof of air leaving his lungs. Jeremy quickly grabbed the Yorb and pulled him to safety so he wouldn't get crushed. Damn it. Grenjan spat quickly, coming up onto her feet, but then having to high step as the tail started to curl. "Oh, no. Grenjan shouted in horror, trying to outrun the tail as best as she could and make it out of the gap. No, not like this." She tripped on a root, and as she stumbled, she was swept in by the tail as the creature curled in on itself, still huffing Jeremy and Wendry like they were scent sticks. Granjan whimpered as she was brought face to face with Jeremy, the other massive clawed paw of the creature coming around to cradle both herself, Jeremy, and the wheezing Wendry. "Can I be myself?" Wendry wheezed out painfully as a massive sword-sized nail came to rest around his neck. "Don't you dare piss on me." Jeremy growled to Wendry, moving the claw away from the Yorbal's neck and keeping the creature's nose away from him, in case it caused it to do something else we need to. Jeremy started, then closed his eyes as the giant creature huffed him again, dragging his hair into its nose and then giving both Wendry and Jeremy a lick to get the ship over here. "Now you want Aerie to fly our ship," Grenjan said in a quiet outrage, also catching an errant lick from the massive wolf dragon. "She'll crash it into us before she ever landed it properly." Jeremy shook the spit away from his face as the creature licked him a few more times, spitting out as a large glob of slaver coursed down his face. "Just tail the point to bring the ship here." Granjan wiggled back and forth until 2 of her 4 hands were free, then tapped a quick message to the likely sleeping point. The message was not answered for nearly 20 minutes, and Aerie's only reply was a kissy face emoji. The emojis were becoming extremely popular now that the humans had unleashed their sarcastic expertise across the stars, and Grangan hated them. Aerie, on the other hand, had several collections of them, and let Grenna know she was close by sending her an emoji of a cat playing with a ruler. The ship landing was rough by all standards, but the beast didn't even try to move, instead opening its giant eyes and watching the craft with red-eyed curiosity. Aerie came prancing down the ramp of the ship, wearing her now iconic cat ear headphones from Earth on her pointed ears and a bright pink pair of Earth-made Crocs. "So you found it, Aerie," shouted with a laugh, slapping her knees. "What is it doing? Shouldn't it be tearing you guys apart or something?" Jeremy and Wendry glowered at Aerie upside down as a large beast had been rolling back and forth and was currently settled onto its back at an angle. "Do you think you can drop us soon?" Grandine bellowed out muffledly from beside the beast's neck, her entire body barely visible through the thick fur. "Is it gassed?" Aerie asked, jumping down onto the grass and skipping towards a giant purring animal. "I mean, we can likely drag it in if it's gassed, but that would be a lot of cable and parts to move around." "Why is it like this?" "I think it has something to do with Jeremy," Wendry growled, then let out a quiet "oh" as a creature's long tongue caught him across the face. Aerie hummed to herself, ran back inside the ship, then came back out with a long pry bar. I think the main issue is you guys being in his grasp. Let's try and get you free." Slowly and methodically, Airy began applying pressure between the beast's toes. There were a few close calls with the tail, as well as Airy almost getting grabbed up with Grennan, but she managed to wiggle both the Jinn and Yorbel free from their hairy bonds as Grennan and Wendry rubbed at their joints and rolled their necks. Airy stood in front of them, tilting her head at Jeremy as she leaned against her pry bar. "Well," Jeremy shouted down at her as the creature began to slap at his face and sniff at his hair over and over. "Get me out of here." Airy turned to Wendry. "If we get the human loose from that thing, is it going to attack us? You think it's possible?" Wendry replied, rubbing the old spittle from his fur. "But at this point, I think something on Jeremy is getting it high enough to not be outwardly hostile." "Get me away from this thing," Jeremy yelled angrily, jerking himself back and forth from within the massive paws of the dragon-like beast. "It's been doing nothing but sniffing and licking me since it snatched me up." "That may be the key, actually," Granjan murmured, finally getting her curved mask back on correctly. "What if we use Jeremy as bait?" "Bait?" Jeremy shouted, but was quickly smothering by the large timberwolf head of the beast. Airy nodded, wiggling her pry bar back and forth. "We could pop him out, and he'll run for the ship as soon as his boots hit the ground. Actually, that's not half bad. Granjan, could you and Wendry go inside the ship and get the cage all ready?" The pair of them gave the point an odd look, but nodded, making their way back up the ship. Airy waited patiently for the creature to get a good nuzzle and sniff off of Jeremy, then started working on the many digits that held the human in place. "You know, boss," Airy began shoving her bar into place. "You did always say you wanted to see the wilds of the universe and meet Mythic not when they do this." Jeremy spat his hair, resembling a giant cowlick. "Now get his thumb off me and get me out her," Airy said calmly, finally managing to get her pry bar between a few digits that would elicit a little shock of pain. "This beastie has no dangly bits." "Harry," Jeremy growled, kicking his feet around to get more room. Airy pushed up on the bar, and the creature's eyes shot open the intense shock of nerve pain, causing it to open all of its paws at once. Jeremy Fish flopped up into the air and hit the grass on all fours, then took off into a sprint towards the ship. "Well, that was lucky," Airy said with a smile, ducking down as the creature righted itself with a quick twist of its body. "I guess fingies are all the same no matter what creature it is." Jeremy was sprinting as hard as he could, looking over his shoulder to see the long dragon-esque body of the creature twist and loom into the open. He plunged fear, kicking his legs into overdrive as he screamed at the ship Grangan. "Grangan, get the cage ready." There was no response, except for the engines to the ship turning back on, spooling up with power. He then heard Airy puffing along an angle away from him, running towards the cockpit ramp, and he had another sudden jolt of fear as he yelled over at her, "You better not leave me here." Jeremy screamed at her, jabbing a finger at her as the creature tumbled head over heels behind him, too high to run properly. "If you leave me here, I will find you. Just run at the cage," Airy shouted back at him, and Jeremy was finally close enough to see Wendry working the winch system, drawing up the magnetic guillotine door of the cage. The beast found its footing and surged forward, clearing the distance between Jeremy quickly, despite it appearing to forget how its four legs worked with the shuttering rattle of the deck plating. Jeremy made it just past the magnetic door as the beast slammed into him, carrying both Jeremy and the creature itself into the large, solid-walled cage. "I got it," Wendry bellowed, slamming the release button and letting the door slam shut. Granjan opened the hole. Granjan threw her cutting torch away and wrenched open the partially cut door, bending over to see Jeremy getting another good round of huffing. "Take my hands." Jeremy reached out and grabbed both of the offered hands with his own, and he was slowly jerked out of the hole, inch by inch. In the end, it took both Granjan, four of her arms, Wendry and Airy, to finally extract Jeremy from the cage, and he looked a little worse for wear due to the beast getting desperate and using its claws towards the end. As Airy fixed up the rape marks on Jeremy's legs, Wendry wasted no time in taking off, getting them off of the planet before anything else showed up to get a whiff of Jeremy. It took roughly 42 hours for the creature to sober up, and that's when the waving started. "Jeremy, friend, boss, human. You got to go get that thing high again." Wendry moaned out one morning, his fully colored eyes strained and dark around the edges. It's been 12 hours of the howling and keening. Just go let it sniff. You, Jeremy, stubborn, but as tired as the rest of them, was making coffee for Airy and the gin as your balls got odd when they drank coffee. I'm not doing it. I will do a lot of things for money, but I'm not letting myself be used as catnip for the wolf dragon down there. Granjon grumbled into the kitchen area with Airy, both of them looking as dog-tired as Wendry felt boss. Airy sighed out, pulling lightly on her long ears to try and alleviate some of the headache. She had just let it get one good whiff, enough to net us a solid nap. Granjon nodded. I agree, Jeremy. Just sit next to the hole and let it sniff you. It'll pull me through. Jeremy whined, pointing down at his leg. It damn near took my legs off. What if I cut a small hole? Granjon asked, wobbling back and forth on her feet after being awake for nearly 24 standard hours. Just a little bitty hole, just a itty bitty one. Airy held up her hand, her pointer and thumb finger pinching near each other. Itty bitty hole, boss, just itty bitty. It took some more asking and a few threats of mutiny to get Jeremy to agree, but Granjon was finally given permission to cut a few slits into the side of the cage. The creature growled and struck at the wall of the cage when it saw Granjon, the entire contraption rattling back and forth as she cut. Granjon was sweating bullets as the creature bared its massive fangs, snarling and biting at the air that was singing with sparks. But when it saw Jeremy loom into view, its demeanor changed. Instead of its hair being flayed out and teeth bared, it became excited. Its tail lashed from side to side. It began to trill and purr, and it then rolled onto its back, nose pressed against the slits and puffing in small shots of air. Jeremy, with tired eyes and a brain lacking proper sleep, slumped against the slits, and the creature started taking deep purring lungfuls of his hair. Jeremy fell asleep against the cage, the creature curling up beside the wall as well, and the rest of the ship finally got some peaceful rest. This pattern continued for several more days. Jeremy would wake up, take his breakfast, and go eat beside the cage. The creature would inhale Jeremy a few times, then watch Jeremy eating, tilting his massive head and giant ears back and forth, as Jeremy just talked to it, filling the space that his data slate would not. It was a long way to the Fellamore home planet, and with no jump maps available around here, they would be traveling in normal space for another 7 days before they hit one of the elf speed lanes. To pass that time, Airy wanted to do some experiments to see how smart the creature was, and nearly caused a panic when she hit the lift button and opened the magnetic guillotine door on the cage. Are you out of your mind? Grangon wailed from up on the service catwalk, looking down into the cargo bay with horror. Why would you set it loose? Airy looked up as the creature prowled out of the cage past her, looking around for Jeremy. I mean, it didn't eat me right away. That's a good sign, right? It's out. Granjon screamed, gesturing around with her forearms wildly. How are you going to get it back inside its cage? What's all the yelling about? Holy Wendry screamed, stepping through the main doorway above the ladder down into the cargo bay, only to scramble back through it. Jeremy hits loose. Jeremy came sprinting down the corridor and bursted into the cargo bay, whipping his warm cap from his head and fluffing out his hair. Where is it? Greg, and I'm going to jump inside you. Grabbed. Jeremy's voice trailed off as he looked down into the cargo bay, watching as Airy lightly tapped her palms on the creature's nose like it was a bongo drum. Airy, Jeremy said, and both she and the creature looked up at the human. The creature's eyes widened, and it surged up onto its legs, its tail lashing back and forth with pleasure at seeing the human. Airy chuckled to herself as the massive creature leaned up onto the corridor crossing, giving Jeremy a few light SNPs. Wolves, before leaning over and bowling Wendry over with its nose. Hey, boss, Airy said, tapping her nose and forward as the creature jumped up onto its cage, leaning up and pawing absent-mindedly at the screeching form of Granjon. I have an idea. Jeremy was clicking his tongue at the Timberwolf dragon thing, clapping his hands to try and get it to stop swatting at Granjon. What? What if we didn't take this thing to the Fellamores? Airy said, watching Granjon climbing the support rails to the catwalk in order to get further away from the creature. What if we, Jeremy stopped then, slowly looked towards Airy. We are not taking it to El Cardis. Why not? Aerie said, placing her hands on her small hips. He pays top dollar for anything he can ride. Plus he's human. It may treat him the same. Wendry, still laying on the deck, blinked up at Jeremy. He'll pay more than the fellow Moors, and it will at least get played with. I bet he'll let the young ones ride it for a small fee. Since when do you care? Jeremy sat down at the Orpal. Wendry shrugged, because meeting up with this circus is only half the distance to the fellow Moors. Faster it's off this boat, the happier I'll be. I vote circus. Grenjan shouted from the ceiling, then hissed at the creature from within her mask. Get this damn thing out of here, to Grenjan's delight. The flight to Rendezvous with El Cardis was short, though. It took a lot of baiting and playing with the creature to get it out of the cargo hold. El Cardis was impressed by the size of the creature, as well as its agility, and his massive circus could provide the room needed for it to live comfortably. Thankfully, one of the human-animal trainers took to the creature nearly on contact, and the odd sniffing behavior was observed. It appeared that whether the human was male or female, the creature seemed to derive a lot of pleasure from sniffing and licking their hair catnip. The timber dragon was an instant success at the Starbound Circus, though her origins began to draw rather baleful eyes from the Confederation. As the creature cradled its captives, one thing becomes clear. The bond between humans and the galaxy's most dangerous beasts is more profound than anyone could have ever imagined. But what happens next? Will the humans survive this unexpected encounter, or is there something even more powerful at play? Stay tuned to Sci-Fi Humanity for more mind-bending tales from the outer reaches of the universe. And remember, in the vastness of space, it's not just about survival, it's about who holds the leash.